Good evening, everyone. We greet you this evening and thank you for joining us for another update in the COVID-19 situation in Barbados. This evening, we have the Attorney General, the Honorable Dale Marshall, and Dr. Anton Best of the Ministry of Health and Wellness. The Attorney General is going to take us through the most recent directives, or the current directives. The Prime Minister spoke last evening, and there seems to be a little lack of clarity as to what happens over the course of the next few days, and therefore we want to make it clear for you what happens at the private level, what happens at the public level, what happens at the commercial level, and generally what is expected of us as we go into this next phase. We had the pause, we had the stop, and now we've got some movement, and the Attorney General is going to explain what that is. Dr. Best will take the questions of the media, but he is going to take us through the latest information on the health data in relation to COVID-19. So I turn immediately to the Honorable Dale Marshall, Attorney General of Barbados. AG.
Thank you very much, Liz, and good evening, Barbados. I'm happy to be able to speak with you this evening. You will know that the Prime Minister did indicate that I would be speaking on Saturday night. Unfortunately, arising out of the Prime Minister's address last night, some Barbadians seem to feel or believe that the measures that she announced last night came into effect immediately. And that is largely why I've been asked to bring forward this address so that we can get things in perspective and to make sure there's no confusion. So the first point I want to make is that the current directive under which we are operating ends on February 28th at midnight. So the current directive, with all of its restrictions, continues unabated until Sunday night. The measures announced by the Honourable Prime Minister will take effect from the 1st of March and will run for a 2-week period until the 14th of March. Because I think the Prime Minister said that shops will be allowed to open, some people seem to believe that that was in reference to today and tomorrow and Sunday. And we've had numerous reports that Barbadians have opened shops. Now, I'm quite sure that the Prime Minister made it clear, but it is our duty as the government to try to rein things in before they get out of hand. Shops, supermarkets, all of those things will not be allowed to open over the weekend. This is the continuation of the directive that we are operating under, directive number 4. So for those people who stole a fast food and opened their shop today, and if they think that they'll have an opportunity to open it tomorrow, they are absolutely wrong. The COVID unit will be out and looking to deal with those particular kinds of issues. Another call that we've had frequently is to ask whether stay-at-home weekend will be in operation from 6 this evening until 6 from 7 this evening until 6 on Monday morning. That is not the case. The stay-at-home weekend was for last weekend. If we were going to put that kind of measure in place for this weekend, there is absolutely no doubt in the mind of any of us that the Prime Minister would have indicated that last night and would have hammered it home. We do not have a national stay-at-home weekend as we did last week. However, it is important for me to remind you that the directive requires that unless you are leaving home for any of the purposes, and we've gone over these almost ad nauseum, you are required to stay at home. So if you're not an essential service worker, if you are not going to the supermarket, if you're not going to the gas station, if you're not going to buy bread, if you're not doing any of those things that we have permitted, if you're not going to the beach tomorrow morning, then you are required to stay at home, and the current directive makes that clear. With effect from Monday, or put another way, a minute past midnight on Sunday night. Directive number 5 will come into force. Directive number 5 carries forward many of the characteristics of directive number 4, but in some important respects, we have liberalized a few things and allowed some things to open. And let me take the opportunity to share some of those with you. And while we are pretty much completed with our work on the directive, there is some refinement that will continue, but I can say to you that what I present to you is 99% of what we are going to be doing. So appliance stores will be allowed to operate with effect from Monday for the sale, delivery, and installation of appliances and related things, so repairs and so on. Those things will be able to operate from Monday. We will also allow automotive stores, workshops for vehicle repair, servicing, the sale of spare parts for motor vehicles, motorcycles, and bicycles. That will be allowed to resume from Monday, and this will operate between the hours of 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. The arrangements for bakeries and bread depots and so on will continue. Construction projects will be able to resume on Monday. And obviously, if construction projects are going to resume, we have to allow those allied services that allow construction to continue to operate. So it stands to reason, therefore, that hardware stores will be allowed to open from Monday. But not just hardware stores, but also those services that go to support construction, such as architects, engineers, quantity surveyors, all of those things that go to support construction will be allowed to operate from Monday. I make it clear though, and it bears repeating, for every exemption that we grant, it is on the condition that the companies that are exempted operate with the smallest possible staff, such as would allow them to operate safely. So even though we're allowing construction projects to operate as of Monday, we will be expecting them, we will be requiring them to have the minimum number of employees that are available, that can possibly work on the site, having due regard for safety and the ability to carry out the work in a practical fashion. Courier services will be able to resume fully from Monday, and therefore Barbadians who have packages with FedEx and DHL and so on, that will begin again. In relation to gas stations, we have a hybrid arrangement that is proposed. Gas stations and their automarts will be allowed to resume for full service. And by full service, I'd like to remind you that under the current directive, while you can go to a gas station, those gas stations are not allowed to sell any food or beverage items. They can only sell you things that are allied to the use of your vehicle. So you can get motor oils, you can get windscreen wiper blades and things of that sort. But the things that you would previously have been able to purchase almost as a matter of course, bread, drinks and so on, that is what obtains now. But from Monday to Saturday, gas stations will be able to resume full service. On Sunday, though, we dial it back. So on Sunday, we come back to the arrangement that exists now. So during the future coming directive, from Monday to Saturday, gas stations full service during the opening hours. But on Sunday of next week, they will dial back to only selling products related to motor vehicles and so on, bottled gas, top-ups, telephones, and top-ups for phones, pharmaceuticals, and so on. I've indicated before that hardware stores will be allowed to open. In addition, landscapers and gardeners will be allowed to operate. We've had numerous calls, and I can therefore confirm to you that maids, nannies, and other household staff will be allowed to go back to work as well. One of the areas that is considered to be of somewhat less risk, but of great value in terms of being able to move activity along, would be those areas that we call professional service firms. And we feel that at this point in time, on the condition that they operate with the minimum number of staff, in fact, with skeleton staff, we are now going to allow those professional service entities like accountants, actuaries, architects, I've already mentioned engineers, land surveyors, quantity surveyors, and attorneys at law to resume operations from Monday. But again, the caveat is that they must operate with skeleton staff. The public will realize that for the last few weeks we've had public markets closed. This created a challenge for farmers. It also created an especially great challenge for fishermen, and we are therefore allowing public markets, including fish markets, to reopen. And of course, everybody has been asking, what about fishermen? As I said, we have allowed fish markets to reopen, so it bears very little explanation to say that fishing as a profession and as a way of supporting your families will be able to operate as the owners of boats and so on require. In relation to restaurants, restaurants will not be allowed in-house dining. They will only be able to operate for curbside pickup, drive-through, or off-site delivery of meals. I'm sure that's good news for some Barbadians, but not available for in-house dining. Bars are not allowed to open. Bars are not going to be allowed to open. Supermarkets, mini marts, corner shops, village shops, rum shops, they will all be allowed to operate on a daily basis. But we wish to make it absolutely clear here that in relation to rum shops, we will allow you to serve your customers, but the customers are going to have to collect their items and leave. So while you'll be allowed to open, you will not have the opportunity to facilitate the kind of gregarious behavior that Barbadians are known for. So unfortunately, you will simply not be able to have the game of dominoes and cards and so on that we so much enjoy. So the good news is, for those of you for whom it is good news, rum shops are allowed to open, but not for sit-down consumption. You can pick up and then go on your way. Tradesmen, carpenters, plumbers, all those things will be allowed to work as needed. For those people who have been suffering severely because their phones have not been working and things of that sort, you'll be happy to know that the vendors of computers, computer supplies, electronics, and telephones will be able to operate once more between the hours of 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. In relation to the many wayside vendors that we have, we are going to permit wayside vendors once more to operate. But I think the Prime Minister made it absolutely clear that other than for coconut vendors, there will be no wayside vending on the hard shoulder of our ABC highway. It is perilous, it is dangerous, and it must be brought to an end. So other than coconut vendors, there will be no wayside vending on the hard shoulders. But that is to make it clear too as well that off-road vending of vegetables in our many communities as it exists now, that kind of stuff will be allowed to continue. So what we have is a gradual relaxation of various things that were not available before. And the condition is, as always, is that you are expected to follow the protocols. And I want to make this point, Liz, and then I'll hand over to you. In every instance, a business owner is responsible for ensuring that the people within his establishment and that the people who are lining up outside of his establishment follow the COVID protocols. Plain and simple. So if you're a supermarket, it isn't just the people who are inside of your supermarket that you're responsible for. The people who are lined up on the outside, the obligation is on you squarely to make sure that those people follow the protocols. If they don't follow the protocols, the liability is yours and your establishment can be closed. My final word is that the COVID unit will be out in force over the next 2 weeks. They have been out in force before, but we are supplementing the manpower resources so that we can have as many people on the ground monitoring how Barbadians behave as possible. And as the Prime Minister has said again and again and again, based on how Barbadians behave, deal with each other, respect the COVID protocols, operate with a sense of propriety and wisdom, we would be able to decide what happens after that. But the caveat is always there that should Barbadians not follow the protocols, not follow good sense, then we will have to take things into our own hands and tighten up once more. And we know that none of us want that to happen. Liz, I hand over to you.
Attorney General, there are some questions coming in that I'm going to put you. What about bread vans? And what about insurance companies and insurance brokerages?
In relation to bread vans, we are going to allow bread vans to operate. There's no issue there. Bread vans are going to be allowed to operate. But from the very outset, the complaint that was made had to do with people congregating en masse around the outside of the bread van. And we are asking you, and again, I've made it clear that the operator of the establishment is responsible for the people lining up on the outside. So people who are operating bread vans have a legal obligation to make sure that their customers line up and follow the COVID protocols. So just because you're not operating in a building with 4 walls and so on, doesn't mean that you are relieved of that obligation. So bread vans, just like bread depots, will be allowed to operate, but in the event that the individuals are not following the protocols, we will shut them down regrettably in exactly the same way as we've shut down businesses. In relation to insurance companies, we have not at this point allowed insurance companies to reopen, but from our intelligence, most of the insurance companies, if not all, are accepting payments through Sure Pay and salary deductions and things of that sort, and therefore we don't anticipate that at this point in time there's going to be any major disruption to how insurance companies operate. We do know that Barbadians want to make their payments face-to-face, but we have absolutely acceptable alternatives. We can make our payments through banks and so on. So there are alternatives that are available, and we encourage Barbadians to work with the insurance companies in exploring those alternatives.
I have an eagle-eared, I know there's eagle-eyed, but I'm saying eagle-eared, person who is saying that, would you kindly clarify whether supermarkets are going to open tomorrow? The person said that they think you said that you can leave your home to go to the supermarket. Maybe or maybe not leave our homes to go to the supermarket.
Let's make it clear. We are under Directive number 4. And under Directive number 4, supermarkets and mini-marts are only allowed to open Monday to Friday. Directive number 4 ends on Sunday night. So that with effect from Monday 1st of March straight through to the 14th of March, supermarkets will be able to operate as they operated prior to the curfew arrangements. Some of them would have closed on Sundays, some of them would have opened on Sundays. We are allowing supermarkets and mini-marts that flexibility during the period of the 1st March to the 14th of March. So if I misled you by saying that people will be allowed to go to the supermarket on Sundays, it was no reference to this Sunday, but Sunday of the following week.
AG, I think that everybody in Barbados must have my phone number, so I have a plethora of questions. Although, okay, so what about car rental services? Do they fall into the general?
car rental.
into the general
So-
umbrella of,
So I think perhaps the easiest way of saying it is this. In terms of preparing the directive, you would appreciate it is infinitely easier to say those things which you are allowing to open than to say those things that you're prohibiting. In our society, people like to know that you say what you cannot do. But for the purposes of a directive, we have thousands of different kinds of businesses in Little Barbados. So it is easier to craft a directive and to express those things that are specifically allowed. If you have not heard your area of business mentioned here, if you've not heard the particular kind of activity mentioned here, then you are not allowed to open. So florists have written, are we going to be allowed to open? The answer is no, you're not allowed to open.
can he open his church office?
We have stipulated in the directive that churches are allowed to open for the purposes of worship, and we've stipulated the number. Just like every other enterprise in Barbados, churches are going to have to find different opportunities to service their congregation. But the face-to-face interaction that might happen in a church office is not going to be permitted.
You're going to speak now? Dr. Anton Best.
Thank you, Ambassador Thompson. My duty is relatively easy compared to that of the Attorney General's this evening. I am simply going to present the dashboard for Thursday, the 25th of February. So yesterday, Barbados recorded 45 new COVID cases, and 99 persons recovered from COVID and were discharged from isolation. In total, the Public Health Lab conducted 922 tests, which results in a positivity rate of 6% for Thursday. Sadly, I have to announce that there was one death on Thursday, and that was a death in a 79-year-old Barbadian male who resided at a nursing home. So the total deaths in Barbados due to COVID-19 is now up to 33. The 45 cases comprise 21 women and 24 men. 7 of the persons who were newly diagnosed were actually previously admitted to the Harrison's Point facility for assessment. And just as a reminder, because I do get a lot of questions about what is this assessment, sometimes when you diagnose a person with COVID on the PCR test in the lab, we look for a value, and if that value is showing is say around 30 or higher, it is indicating or suggesting that this person may have had COVID previously. We don't want to count old cases of COVID that are still turning up because they're not infectious. So we have to do an assessment. We have to ask the person if they previously had COVID, when were they diagnosed. We have to ask a whole series of questions to determine if in fact they're a new case of COVID. So 7 of the 45 cases were persons who were previously admitted to the Harrison's Point facility. So in total, since March of 2020, Barbados has recorded 2,994 confirmed cases of COVID, with the majority of those being men, and men accounted for 1,604 cases, and women accounted for 1,390 cases. And of course, the vast majority of persons with COVID have recovered. The recovery is at 2,270 persons. The Public Health Lab, since February of last year, so just over a year now, we've been doing COVID testing, has completed 124,392 COVID tests. Also new to the dashboard is an update on the vaccination program. Yesterday, Thursday the 25th of February, we vaccinated 3,692 people. So to date, the total number of persons who have been vaccinated for COVID-19 is 29,283, with 12,687 of those being men and 16,596 of those being women. Ambassador Thompson, if I may, I'll just add a little bit of context to what the Prime Minister said yesterday in her speech when she was talking about the overall trends. She alluded to them. She did not go into detail. She did indicate that someone from the Ministry of Health will go into just a little bit more detail, and certainly in the question and answer session section, we can go into more detail and answer any questions. But we pay very close attention to certain indices, and one of those indices is positivity rate. So within the last few days, within the last week, we've caught up in terms of the backlog that we talked about for many weeks. So we're now able to say, for instance, that the cases that were diagnosed on Thursday, apart from the ones who were previously admitted for assessments, those were persons who were actually tested on that day. Okay? So we also went through a process where the previous cases, we assigned them to the day that they were actually tested and not the days that they were reported. So then we looked at the positivity rates. And when we did that, we saw that we had a gradually rising positivity rate from the beginning of the year when this outbreak started. And it peaked around the 14th of February, around the 14th, 15th of February. And since then, there's been a decreasing positivity rate, which is a good sign, and that's a trend that we want to keep up. The other indices that we pay attention to are the total number of cases. We do look at the what we call the rolling average, 7-day rolling average, and that gives us a sense as to what is happening, where is this epidemic going. And when we do that, we also see that the overall trends are speaking to the epidemic easing up. Of course, that does not mean that we can forget all of the things that we've been told that we need to do. We need to continue doing all of those measures. We need to continue paying attention to our hand hygiene, wearing your face mask at all times, and remembering physical distancing, in addition to the other measures that we have been implementing. And then, of course, the Attorney General would have talked about the measures at the national level that are currently in play under Directive number 4 and the ones under Directive 5, which is starting from Monday. So all of those will contribute to declining infection rate of COVID-19 in Barbados, but we all as individuals have a role to play in order to beat back this COVID-19 epidemic. Thank you.
Members of the media are present with us, so we turn now to the media houses.
Yes, good evening, Ambassador. I wanted to ask the AG a question regarding from Directive number 5 in going forward from Monday, the 1st of March. 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew still applies. Therefore, supermarkets, hardware stores, and other entities, what time does staff, in other words, what time is the accepted close off for those stores to allow the workers to get home for 7 o'clock?
That time will continue as it is now. So that time is currently 4 p.m. And we consider that 4 o'clock shut-off time would allow enough time for sanitizing, cleaning up, and so on, and then to allow workers to be able to get home without too much haste before 7 o'clock. And let me, now that you've taken me back to hours for supermarkets, and I did say at the beginning that we're 99% of where we need to be in terms of the directive, and I'm being reminded that in yesterday's press statement, the Prime Minister insisted that on the 7th they shall they rest. Therefore, the directive will reflect that on Sunday, supermarkets, mini-marts, and those other establishments will be closed. So please make note of that. The directive will say, instead of supermarkets and so on being allowed to open daily, it will say that they will be closed on Sunday.
Yes, good night, AJ. Since the introduction of the Directive 4 and government's warning of a zero tolerance approach during that period, could you give us an assessment regarding the compliance, based on your assessment, of course, of Barbadians during the last 11 days? And I also have a question for Dr. Best. Now, the Prime Minister would have stated, and you would have alluded to it as well, in announcing the partial reopening of the economy, that the COVID-19 matrices are not where they're supposed to be. The positivity rating as of today was still at 6%. Now, how do you foresee us getting the numbers and the trends in the right direction now that we are having less restrictions? And I have a follow-up question for Dr. Bess after that one as well.
Well, if I can go first, how Barbadians operated under the directive for the last 11 days. I believe that the work of the COVID unit has been responsible for making it quite clear to Barbadians where the administration stands on the issue of breaching directives. And I therefore am satisfied that Barbadians have by and large been compliant. In instances, there have been some people who show a callous disregard for their own safety and a callous disregard for the safety of the individuals with whom they come into contact. But that has been the very, 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 very few Barbadians. So I'm satisfied that they have operated largely in compliance with the directives.
Thank you. So the question was about the downward trends and in relation to the changes that are coming under Directive 5. First of all, let me make a slight correction. Somebody pointed it out to me that the positivity rate is actually 5%. I made an error when I said 6%. One of the things that I've stated previously, even the AG mentioned it, is that we have to be cautious and we have to be responsive. So we are relaxing a bit. If we realize that because of the relaxation, and we don't anticipate that this will happen, but if we realize that because of it, things start to change again, we are very responsive and we are going to continue to make recommendations where that is concerned, where the directive and the measures, the public health and social measures are concerned. So it's a very good point. One thing I will state is that it may not be very sustainable to continue what we've been doing under Directive 4, but we in the Ministry of Health have made the recommendation that there can be some relaxation, and that is why the measures that are being implemented are very cautious. But I stress that we will also be very responsive to the indices that we are paying close attention to.
If I may follow up on that, Dr. Bess. Given that the lab would have only managed to clear that backlog just about a week ago, I'm subject to correction. Had enough time passed for an accurate assessment of the trends with those current numbers?
I did mention it in my opening remarks that what we did is we went back and reanalyzed the data. So previously, as you remember, when we were presenting the dashboard, we would have given you the numbers for that day. But it was clear that with the backlog, some of the positive cases that we had identified were actually tested, not necessarily the day of reporting, which is usually the 24 hours before, but on previous days. So we've cleared the backlog. And so what we've done is the previous cases that we had diagnosed, we've assigned them to the days that they were tested. So that is how we're able to get accurate and realistic positivity trends for the analysis that I mentioned.
Sorry, Ian.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you're hearing me. Right, Dr. Bess, I want to the Prime Minister's comments last night in relation to the second batch of vaccines. Can you be more specific this evening in relation to the time frame for when that second batch of vaccines is expected to arrive in the country?
Boss, if the Prime Minister can do that, I, Anton Bess, certainly cannot give you any more specifics. And the reality of the situation is it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, and we are fighting to get vaccines. We're doing it as a country, and we're doing it as part of CARICOM. And the Prime Minister explained that in great detail yesterday. So there's no more that I can add to that.
Yeah. Hi, good night. Randy Bennett from Barbados today. I have a question for the Attorney General. In recent times, there has been a bit of an outcry from Barbadians as relates to the treatment method of the persons going before the courts in contravention of the protocols. We would have seen some Barbadians being remanded to prison, and subsequently some lawyers also came out and spoke on the issue, and they felt that it was a bit, that the legal system was being a bit heavy-handed on Barbadians who were found in breach of the protocols. I just wonder your opinion if you think that Barbadians who appeared before the court, some of them were first-time offenders, do you think that they were being treated fairly?
I think that in many of these fora, I've reiterated the basis on which our doctrine of separation of powers sits. The judiciary is responsible for hearing cases and determining sentences. The legislature, that to which I belong, will have enacted a statute, and the executive will have settled what the maximum penalty is. And that's all we do. We determine what the maximum penalty for any offense is. A judicial officer, whether it's a magistrate or a judge, hearing the facts, if the person is convicted, will then make his own judgment, his or her own judgment, as to what sentence is appropriate. If an accused and his attorneys are dissatisfied from the point of view that they consider the sentence to be excessive, then there are clear mechanisms in law. You can appeal. And the appeal court, as it did only this week, severely cut back on a sentence that was imposed by a magistrate. That is the job of the appeal court. As Attorney General, therefore, I reiterate that I have no view to express on whether the individuals who go before the courts are treated fairly or unfairly in relation to the sentencing. Justice is blind, so every Barbadian who goes before the court is treated fairly unless the Court of Appeal determines otherwise. But I regret that I'm not going to be drawn into a debate on whether a sentence was excessive or a slap on the wrist. Those are not matters for the executive or for the parliament. Those are matters for the judiciary.
Yes, good night again, Dr. Bess. Can you tell us if there are any more cases of Missy? And also, additionally, could you give us an update on the numbers in the primary and secondary care facility at Harrison Point?
Right. So last week, Monday, during the press conference, actually, we would have reported that we had one case of a 9-year-old with the condition that you just referred to, Miss C. We have not had any additional cases. I need to remind you that it's a very rare condition, and we're learning a lot about it. But what we can tell you is that it is rare and it is associated with COVID-19 infection. Unfortunately, you're asking about the trends in the isolation facilities, and I did not arm myself with that information prior to coming here this evening.
And the final question from me, Dr. Bess. What positive achievements can you take away from the soon to be concluded 1-month pause? What's your professional assessment of it? Was it successful? Did it achieve its desired objective?
And I'm very cognizant of the pay grade that I am at. I would say, yes, it has achieved its objectives. We needed time to pause. We needed time to slow down, to gather ourselves, to be able to do contact tracing. We also had the Seek and Save program out, as you would recall, which has come to an end. And we needed that. So we in the Ministry of Health definitely needed that. We also needed to stop the rise in the incidence of COVID-19. And we have achieved that. Of course, we would have wanted to see a greater reduction in the incidence, but understand that we are dealing with a very vicious strain of COVID-19, one that we did not have to deal with last year. It is far more contagious. So therefore, that would explain why we're seeing the kind of numbers that we're seeing now compared to the first outbreak and the first wave. We didn't see those kind of numbers previously. So yes, from a public health perspective, we have achieved our objectives.
And another question for the Attorney General, because until any of my colleagues want to chime in terms of the relaxation of the measures at this moment. You mentioned that the supermarkets or businesses that are open are responsible for ensuring that persons are in keeping with the protocols. Is that enshrined in Directive 5? And could you give us an idea what type of, besides having their businesses closed, what other type of recourse is available to the COVID unit or police in that regard?
In every directive, we have stipulated that businesses are responsible for what happens in the inside of their operation and also of what happens on the outside of the operation. So this is nothing new, and you will find it in the current directive, and it will be repeated and is in fact repeated in the draft directive number 5. I'm not quite sure that I understand your second question. Are you asking whether the COVID unit or the police have law enforcement powers where individuals do not ensure that people follow the protocols?
That's correct, sir.
But that is what they do every day. Every time the COVID unit shuts down a place that should not be open or shuts down an operation where the people are not following protocols, every time the police do it, they're doing it precisely in the exercise of that power. So there's no doubt in my mind that they are fully seized of the authority to do so.
I just want to get some clarity from Dr. Best in relation to the positivity rate. You said at present, up to last week, the positivity rate was an average of 5%. What for the health authorities would be an acceptable positivity rate? Can you bring some clarity to that?
Sure. So the benchmark that we're working towards is under 5%. I think you may have misunderstood something I said. I didn't say last week, if that's what I heard you say. I said for the 25th. We simply worked out what the positivity rate was. Right.
The daily positivity rate would be what, right?
Right. So the positivity rate based on the dashboard numbers is currently at 5%. And the benchmark that we want to get below is 5%. And we want to keep that there.
Next.
Sorry.
I believe Lorna's next. I believe Lorna is next.
Right. This question is for the AG. I believe Prime Minister Motley would have spoken about the behavior at funerals in terms of the numbers and how people were perhaps crowding and so on. Are we likely to see any tightening of restrictions there for the funerals?
It's difficult to tighten from 10. The current restriction will continue into the next directive, and therefore in relation to churches and other places of worship, for services, 10 individuals, for funerals, 10 mourners, plus the officiant and necessary staff and so on. So those arrangements in respect of churches that we're operating under now will continue into the next directive. And the truth is, the Prime Minister is 100% correct when she says that even though there is a restriction of 10 people, many people are assuming that because the funeral goes straight to the graveyard, and they're outdoors, that they can then have a larger number of people, which is not the case at all. In fact, the COVID unit has had to respond to funerals to try to bring some semblance of order and to ensure that they comply. It's a difficult time, we understand, for mourners, but we have to plead with them, please allow us to get through this. And when the numbers get down, then there'll be an opportunity to relax that particular restriction. But for the moment, I'm afraid it continues.
Mr. AG, just two questions. The first, I would like some clarity as it relates to sports. We're trying to figure out if all sports have been banned for now, or if certain sports are allowed to open. And secondly, as it relates to, just lost my train of thought. Just answer me first, and I'll
allow you to gather your particular train of thought while I deal with the matter of sports. Last night, when the Prime Minister spoke, the Prime Minister did make reference to contact sports. And the Prime Minister did say that contact sports will not be allowed. Let me make it quite clear that as we prepare our directive, at every step of the way, we reflect, we consider, we reconsider, and therefore, in relation to sports, the Prime Minister had further consultations this morning. And while we do understand that there are some sports that are not contact at all, golf, possibly tennis and others, shooting, taking all things into account, the decision has been taken that at this point in time we will permit no sporting activity. So no sporting activity as is restricted now will continue into the new directive, notwithstanding the fact that the Prime Minister did say contact sports. As I said, we are consulting at every step of the way, and therefore, upon engaging in further consultations this morning, the Prime Minister felt it best to go with a total prohibition of sporting activity during the coming 14 days.
Okay. Remember the second question. Obviously, shops, small shops and stuff were allowed. They were given a subsidy from government during the lockdown. When the new directive starts on Monday, obviously those shops are allowed to open, but barbers, hairdressers, they are still to remain closed. Is it government's intention to continue to give those businesses which are closed a subsidy going forward until they're allowed to reopen?
Parameters that have been set for the subsidy are clear. They're dealt with not through the Office of the AG, but through Minister Simmons. And I can say to you that at this point in time, any entity that currently benefits from a subsidy but is not allowed to open would continue to benefit from that subsidy. The Prime Minister has not indicated that that particular arrangement will be at an end. We want it to come to an end very quickly. We really want Barbadians to get back out to work and to start earning their own dollar. But the situation doesn't obtain. So my answer to you is, shops obviously would stop benefiting from the subsidy because they're allowed to reopen. To the extent that there are other enterprises that have been getting that subsidy but not allowed to open, then those arrangements would continue.
I have a question. I'm not sure if the AG is able to answer it, but let me start off by saying I know that Light and Power and Water Authority follow the original directive from the Prime Minister regarding inability to pay utilities at this point in time, that there's supposed to be no disconnections. However, Digicel and Flow have been ruthless, and I can speak from direct experience. I want to know if there has been any renewal of prevention of disconnection of services from the telecoms sector.
Let me say that I'm not aware of what you speak, but I accept what you say as being your perspective. Our experience in our first shutdown last year was such that the utility services cooperated with us and we asked them to forbear from cutting off services. In fact, you might remember that we even asked the mobile companies to give people additional data so that they will be allowed to have communications and so on. We have not officially sought those particular concessions during this renewed period of shutdown. And therefore, it would be left for those companies to use their feeling of obligation to the Barbadian society in which they operate and earn substantial revenue. But I'm not able, I have no recollection of us settling a position that we would ask those businesses to forbear. If it has happened, I apologize for not being seized of that information.
And Thing did, but yeah. Go ahead, Cole.
Sorry, you want to finish up, Ian? You can go ahead. Okay.
Good.
Question for Dr. Bess again. Besides the positivity rate and the R number, Are there other matrices that are being looked at that you can tell us about?
Sure. So I would have also mentioned the overall trends in terms of the number of cases. So what we do is we look at the 7-day rolling average. So we actually have a graph that looks at the last 7 days, what was happening, and that too is taking a downward trend, just like the positivity rate. There are other indices out there that you can look at, and we are looking at them. I don't have any additional information on those to present tonight, however.
Positivity rate is calculated. I mean, it's an expression that we hear a lot these days, and people assume that it's a straightforward arithmetical formula. Is it? How is it done, please?
It actually is. So all you need to do is to take the number of positive cases and divide it by the total number of tests over a particular period. So the positivity rate of 5% that was reported earlier was taking the 45 cases reported for Thursday and dividing that by 922 tests that were performed at the public health lab. We talked about the benchmark. I mentioned earlier about the benchmark of 5%. So World Health Organization does have a benchmark of 5%. They say if it's over 10%, you're in trouble. So this is something that we're learning about as we go in terms of what are the ideal metrics, what are the ideal indices, what are the ideal indicators. But this is one that is standard, that people are using and paying very close attention to, because it is a very good indication as to what is happening pertaining to your epidemic.
Question. Let me just reiterate that I think I touched on it earlier, but for the avoidance of doubt, those retail stores that are operated by Flow and Digicel will be allowed to function. We understand that Barbadians do need to have things done with their phones and so on, so we're going to permit that. And we're also permitting it in the area outside of in those businesses outside of Flow and Digicel. So the telephone retail operations will be allowed to reopen.
So there we are. I don't see any hands raised by members of the media. We did have quite a number of questions that have come in. We will answer those questions directly, but we want to. I'm sorry? I thought that somebody was asking.
Sorry, my computer actually just froze, so I apologize.
Mr. Goddard?
Yes.
Okay, yes, sorry. Go ahead, please.
Question for, my apologies. Dr. Bess. Kim. Dr. Bess, can you speak? Okay, I think I'm freezing again.
Mr. Best.
Dr. Best, can you
Mr.
speak
Goddard,
to
sorry.
the storage? I understand that there's some concern about storage there for persons who've passed from COVID-19 in terms of the funeral home's ability to be able to, Ministry of Health's ability to be able to store those bodies. Can you speak to the status on that in terms of the amount of storage to do that? And secondly, we've been hearing a lot about, the Harrison Point facility being overcrowded and some persons who've been awaiting a second test having to go back to the QEH pending the outcome of the second test. Can you confirm what's the status in those two situations?
Don't have any information regarding your first query about storage of bodies. I am not aware that there's a challenge. Regarding your second question, you talked about a second test for persons at the Harrison's Point.
To go back to the QEH while awaiting that test because of
that
Harrison's Point.
Yeah, I think you may need to seek some clarity on that, because that's not adding up with me. I don't understand what you're specifically asking there.
I'm just trying to ensure that nobody else's computer has frozen. Appears not. So, thank you very much, Attorney General Dr. Best, for being with us this evening for trying to give greater clarity to the current directive on what exactly is expected of the commercial sector and all Barbadians as we go into this new directive and into this new phase. Whatever you do, the rules still remain the same. The rules for your safety, the rules for your protection. Wear your mask correctly to cover your nose, mouth, and chin. Wash your hands frequently with soap and water, and when you don't have soap and water, use sanitizer. Stay 6 feet away, at least 6 feet away from people who do not live in your same household, within your family and members of your household, particularly around senior citizens and those who have chronic non-communicable diseases. Try to exercise great caution. Wear your mask if possible. Maintain some distance. You are more likely to be on the street and going out socially, and they're at home. You need to protect them. We all need to protect them, and we need to protect each other. While being on pause and being on stop has been difficult for all of us, we continue to have a responsibility to protect each other, protect our communities, and protect the country. That means following the rules for safety, and it means staying home when we don't have to leave. Don't go to the supermarket just for an outing or to the gas station. Stay at home as much as you can. And this evening, we extend deepest condolences to the family of the Barbadian man who died from COVID-19. Indeed, we extend condolences to the families of all Barbadians who are in mourning because their relatives have succumbed to this viral illness. Let us work to beat back COVID. Let's maintain the rules and safety protocols. Let's protect each other and our country. Good evening to you.